Welcome to Hearing God in Scripture, where we dive in the Bible and learn to hear from God. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know how we're doing. Reach out. Talk with us. We'd love to hear from you. And today is going to be another slightly different episode where we go over what I'm reading and John chapter 5.
Right. There's a couple of things that are important. One is that Austin is in the midst of this. You're right. You're in the midst of this. You're chewing on it and you're wrestling on it. We're going to do it together in an attempt to say, okay, God, what are you saying? Do you know how we dealt last time with, what was it, Psalm 131, I think it was, we talked about last time. And just, that was, you could tell God was talking.
Yeah.
And you have to let him talk and you have to surrender to that.
We were not going to talk about it, and we ended up doing an episode on it.
Right. And I'm still in the same passage. In fact, I think that's part of what my passage is about in Exodus that we were going to look at, Exodus 24, that day as well. But and it's very good. But
we'll talk about John chapter 5.
Yeah, let's talk about John chapter 5. And then you need to, here's what we want to do. There's a number of things. One is when you present it, you want to say, look at this passage. In fact, even when you're coming to this to discuss it, you can start by saying, this is the verse that I'm wrestling with and I think God will talk to us about. Or is talking to me about. Maybe he's saying something. So you focus in on that verse, and then we'll go back and work our way to it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
And I would say that what really was standing out to me was it was end of verse 6 and verse 7.
Okay, what are those?
And so verse 6 is, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" And he replies, "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And I was laughing with Tess about that last night because it's just so often what I do.
Oh, yeah. Well, before we get there, we'll get to this point. Let's back up a little bit.
This is what I need to learn.
This is where Jesus, this is in the Gospel of John. So you understand the Gospel of John. It's not one of the synoptic Gospels. Do you know that term, synoptic?
No, but I know John is different than the other.
Right. And they're synoptic, meaning it's Greek stuff, but it means they are very much like each other. And they're sort of built and they go over the same stories. John is different. His means through Jesus' life is different. And he's probably written a little bit later. Do you know, little side tip, there's a little fragment, probably the earliest manuscript fragment we have in the New Testament, from the New Testament. Maybe the Old Testament too, I have to think about that one. But from the New Testament comes from the Gospel of John. And it's this little tiny inch by inch little thing that is from the Gospel of John, dating maybe back to 115 BC, AD, BC, AD, and possibly earlier. It's even possible that it's original.
Interesting.
Probably not original, but it's possible.
Yeah,
and you're
cool.
like, that's fascinating. Anyway, sorry, that was a little sideline.
Well, and another side note is one of the things that Tess and I were talking about was not diving in right to the conclusion.
Right.
And
exactly.
So that's what I need to work on. So
right. And that's why I stopped you before you went there. So good.
Wasn't trying to go there, but yes, I appreciate that because
because you're setting everything up, including yourself, and we're discussing it.
Yeah.
So we come back where Jesus has done, he came out, and one of the things that Austin talked about recently was John chapter 4, the woman at the well, and all that goes on there. And Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, but he stops and has that conversation. And you watch what the gospel writer John is doing and what he's talking about and why he talks about in the particular order he talks about it. Chapter 3 was Nicodemus. Among other things, but Nicodemus, essentially. Then we have the woman at the well, and then we have this story. And you have to say, what is he saying? So on the larger scale, you're going to ask that question. And when and where and how you ask that question is different. You know, it may not come up for years, but still you want to keep your eye on those things and just keep them in mind. So, okay, and then you want to say, what happens here? Why is Jesus here?
So it starts off, Jesus went to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. So it's a Jewish festival going on.
Right. And I forget which one it is. I think I can remember, but anyway, it might have been. It might have been the celebration of the Maccabean Revolt.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's the case. I know. That's a long story. I don't remember. That may not be true, but I'm just going over it. I'll have to look back and see that again. Anyway, but so tell us more. So he's going to Jerusalem for this festival, this feast.
And so it helps me if I read it.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and starting in verse 1 in chapter 5. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And I don't know how...
Just one more verse.
One more verse. So verse 9.
Half a verse, yeah.
At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked.
Oh, do the last part too. That'll help.
Yeah. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath.
Okay. And we could address the other issues, and they are somewhat important in here. But in fact, why John brings it up, why Jesus does it, all that kind of stuff. So you pointed out that the things that really strike you, or the verse that you wanted to focus on, was, do you want to be healed? And his response.
Yes.
Right. Do you want to be healed really might be the big question then, right?
The end of verse 6.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus is coming, and he says, there's this pool. Now, to give you the background story, there's some writing in here. In fact, they have other verses. You might have skipped a few verses in English. I have to see if that happens here, because they have extra ones which say, well, the first person who goes down to the pool, the angel would stir it, and then, you're like, what is that?
I know. I always wonder about that.
Right.
Because it's very interesting.
And somebody else goes in, that means they got healed? Apparently, that's what this guy's saying.
That was my understanding of the pool is first one to get in once it bubbles. There's, something like that. Who knows?
Too many things going through my head. Yeah. And it is curious what's going on there. And we'll leave it at that, but Jesus goes there.
Mm-hmm.
So now he goes there, and I want you to wrestle with this with me, so don't just let me talk, because I will. I'm trying not to.
Like I said, I'm trying not to just jump to the conclusion.
Right. So,
or at least my conclusion. Right?
So Jesus goes there. Why does he go there? And what does he do?
Well, I don't know. Well, he goes, at least he's in the area because of the festival, right? I don't know why he goes to the pool specifically, but could it be he knows he's going to heal somebody on the Sabbath? I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's there. It's a suggestion. And it's a good suggestion. You want to say maybe he goes there to heal somebody because he goes there and he's at this pool, which a lot of invalids are there.
Well, and I guess I can think Jesus obviously is the power of God, has the power of God.
Right.
So he's not going to get healed, right?
Right.
He knows that the power of God is more than a pool that stirs up, right?
Right. And he goes there where all these people are, and then he focuses it on one person, which is a fascinating thing.
And John
because there's a whole lot of invalids there.
And he includes that this guy's been invalid for 38 years, right? So a really long time.
Right.
So maybe that's what Jesus was focused on.
And it says when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, or yours says, I think, and learned, whatever. That's a fascinating statement. Because it appears we would probably bet that here's the guy who's been there the longest.
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
38 years is a long time.
That was a question I had is he's been an invalid for 38 years. Has he been at the pool for 38 years? Right? I don't know. How long has he been waiting and hoping
maybe.
at the pool?
That's a good question. But either way, he found out that this guy, first of all, is not a young guy, and he's been sick for a long, long time. And I don't know how that happened or whatever. And then we have the other thing that comes into play, that it's on the Sabbath, which we'll see if we get into that, if it bears, more scrutiny.
Based on, like we usually try to do, is looking at the chunk. I would say it won't, because that's not explained until later verses, right?
Right. And it's important, but the question is it gonna, yeah, I'm not sure it will, but it might. So we just bring it up and we'll keep it in mind, and we might say, because the reason is because Jesus goes to this pool where the invalids are, and he apparently, it seems to me, that he looks for someone who's been there a long time.
Yeah, and in my head, because I did read all the way through verse 15, it almost was like the two separate things that I was wrestling with.
Right.
And looking at, right, is Jesus' conversation with the invalid, and then later with, the Pharisees.
Right,
which we didn't get to.
Right. And there's a number of things that are in that conversation, but like you said, we get to talk about this one. So we come to this question, right? Do you want to be healed?
And it's
Don't you think that's a strange question?
Well, yeah, because I was just about to say, it's obviously he's at the pool where he thinks he can be healed, so he wants to be healed. But did Jesus notice something, or does he know something we don't about the guy? Right.
Right. And good question. I mean, I don't know if he does. What we know is he knows he's been there a long time, and he asked this question. So that's the context that we have. And we don't have the context that he says he knew other things.
Yes. I guess my question, or what's popping through my head, and I hope I'm not jumping,
No.
Do you want to get well? And then his reply, I have nobody to help me into the pool.
What do you think of that response?
Well, I'm just thinking right now, I wonder, is that an excuse, right? Is he sitting in his, I'll say his brokenness, right? He's an invalid, right? So I don't know, what does that mean? He can't walk, probably,
Yeah,
or
probably, yeah.
It means he.
Probably also he can't get over there,
But I know so often we will sit in pain just because it's what we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
So does he? Is Jesus asking? Well, do you really want to get well? It was just popping into my head right now.
Right.
As we're looking at this, I didn't think about that last night.
Okay, good. And what is his answer?
It's not about getting well.
It doesn't say that, does it? I mean, it sort of touches on it, but he doesn't say, yeah, I want to get well. Mm-hmm. He doesn't come out and say that. And I think that the question is, but then Jesus goes on and heals him, right?
Yes. After he responds that, then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk.
So it doesn't seem like great faith on this guy's part.
Interesting. No.
What we usually look at is that here comes this guy and your faith has healed you because which would mean you put your trust in Jesus, the right guy. But he doesn't seem to do that. He's looking for this water source to heal him.
And he has been an invalid for 38 years and has been at the pool for who knows how long. Right. So does he know about Jesus? Does he know who this is?
I know. In fact, right? I think later on you're going to find out he didn't even know who he was.
I'm trying to ask the questions without knowing the answers.
Right. But
because I do know.
But yeah. But more than that, I mean, Jesus comes along and finds this guy, and he's not looking to Jesus at all. It doesn't seem his answer doesn't have anything to do with, heal me, because he doesn't know that Jesus can heal him or would heal him.
So he almost assumes, which this is what I was laughing about, is he assumes a different question needs to be answered. Or, Jesus is asking, do you want to get well? And then he responds in a way that has nothing to do with getting well. Side related, right? Yeah. Kind of, because that's what the pool is about. But he doesn't actually answer the question. He says all these details that he thinks Jesus wants to hear, which I do all the time. I'm asked a question. Oh yeah. That's why Tess and I were laughing. Because I do that all the time. You ask me a question, a simple yes or no question, and I go ahead and I'm off on a different tangent.
Well, listen to this. Let me see if I can get it back in my head. This man, Jesus asked this question, and this man answers this other way. Mm-hmm. So let's say we say, boy, do you want to, if let's say you're sick, you have cancer or something, and you say, yeah, do you want to get well? And sometimes we do something like this. And we'll have to break this apart. So I'm taking this example, saying, yeah, I want to go get surgery and have these doctors remove this stuff and maybe do some chemo so I can get in remission and get better. And it doesn't answer the question, does it? Mm-mm.
Yeah. And I feel like, so often we do that.
Right. There's a story in a book called Bruchko. It's about this guy who was a missionary, I don't know, a long time ago. And he was down in Brazil and kind of a very unusual guy. But he was getting resource. He went back and brought the gospel to this Amazon group. And at one point, they had a lot of snake bites. And so they had to have anti-venom around, and he got it and got it shipped in, but they'd run out of anti-venom. Mm-hmm. So they were giving him penicillin, which does nothing for a snake bite. But these people were getting healed, and they're like, he says, but you're giving him penicillin. He says, well, we don't really trust the medicine anyway. We're trusting God. Like, that is brilliant. It's the opposite of what we usually do when we're like, we got to go. But no, we're going to trust God. What a terrific perspective where you say, yeah, how about if I turn it around and say, I want to get in, but I'll trust God to heal me. I'll go to the doctor because, that's sort of what we do. But I'm first and foremost going to trust God. So it gave me some motivation to every time I take an aspirin or something like that, I say, God, I don't want to trust this. I want to trust you please heal me. And then I take it. And I said, if it's okay, unless you say don't take it. But, I want to keep that perspective so that I don't end up like this guy. Mm-hmm. Where maybe it's kind of negative and on the downer side.
Yeah.
Because Jesus asked this question, and it's a standout question.
Yep.
Do you want to get well?
Or want to get well.
Get healed, get well, whatever. And because he would come to us with different issues. and this is the healing part. And I don't want to downplay the healing because I think we do that too often. We get a little naturalistic in our basic evangelical form of Christianity too often.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
We don't believe in God's healing.
Okay.
Or his power to do these other things that aren't through the doctor or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
And we don't actively believe, we don't pray for it, and even if we do, we're like, you know, sort of believe. And I'm reading the scripture and saying, listen, God is big and powerful. He still is. And he isn't saying that, you know, therefore the medical place is where we ought to turn. I'm not saying that medicine isn't important or isn't good and isn't God-given, all that kind of stuff. But we have access to God Almighty, and we ought to learn to trust and take advantage of him and learn to depend and put our faith and risk praying and believing.
But really believing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Learn to believe. Learn to put our eyes on Jesus so he can come and say, do you want to get well? And now he says it about other things. Do you want to get rid of that crap in your life, whatever that is? Do you want to, do you want to have peace? That's what he says to the woman essentially, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He basically says, do you want to stop searching?
Right. Would you like to have living water? Would you like to never thirst again? You know, or to Nicodemus, you know, do you want to have a second birth? And, you know, whatever the case is. But in this case, he says it. Do you want to get well? I just think that, you know, it comes to me and I hear Jesus saying, all right, Joel, here you are, and I have things to do in you. Do you want to let me do them? And that isn't quite what he says here, but it's, do you want to be different? And that's a broader picture. I get it. And I'm not trying to downplay the healing part, but I'm trying to let the type of question that Jesus asks move in. And then I want to hear his question, because that's what the guy didn't really do, right? I want to hear his question and respond to him.
And that's what I was wrestling with, is actually hearing the question but answering directly.
Yeah.
Don't walk around it. Which is, I think, in decision making or when you hear from God, it's easy to do because you have this, at least for myself, right? I have this, you know, I'm an engineer, I'm analytical, right? And I analyze things. I like to think about things before I do them. And I think sometimes we just have to answer the question directly, which
is still thinking about something.
Yes, but I mean, in the sense where I can think and think and think and think and think, and then eventually it's like, yeah, God, you were right. Right? And well, I was thinking about it, and God's like, yeah, I told you what to do. So if you would have done it weeks ago, it would have been less stress on you. And yeah.
And again, we're going to avoid the Sabbath thing because that would take us a little bit different road, which is fascinating. But Jesus comes and he heals this guy, which was part of our passage.
Yes.
But he says, do you want to be healed? And okay, I think I get the picture of what John is doing. First of all, he talked about Nicodemus, and then he talked about the woman at the well. These are the three, you know, and then this story with this guy, this invalid for 38 years. And he's presenting somebody who was religious but needed to be saved and how to be saved, that you must be born again. He talks to the woman about, like you said, the being, you know, never thirsting and finding true living water in real life. And not, what do you say, not going to the other well, whatever.
Yeah. Whatever that may be.
Right. And then this one is about healing and the power of God to heal, and that Jesus seems to go and look for the hardest case. We might say it that way. And he asks this guy this question before he heals him. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't get a fully positive answer, sort of, which maybe is really good news for me, because I could be a terrible answerer, and God can say stuff. I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe I sort of whatever. And God is so gracious to me that he says, okay, good enough.
It's funny because I was thinking that, right? You answer indirectly and God will say, look, you're trying.
Thank God for his mercy.
I don't know if I should. Well, here, let me have this happen so that it pushes you a little bit, right?
Right. And I know there's more in this passage about this guy. Like later on, he says, stop sinning so that worse doesn't happen to you. It's a long story, and we could look in that one. But in this case, Jesus goes to a guy who is pretty beat up by life.
Yeah. And apparent in his answer, right? Like you were alluding to, it's kind of negative answer.
Right. And he doesn't just heal him. Sometimes he does that, but in this case, he doesn't. He doesn't just heal him. He asks him the question. And that's where we focus in to say, God, what are you asking me in my getting beat up by whatever it is that's beating me up? Mm-hmm. Why do you ask that question? Because I think that what he's doing is asking us something similar. What does that mean exactly? Do you want to get well?
Well, it's almost leading. Mm-hmm. It's like a leading question, right?
Right. Well, God says, I have this life for you.
I was just about to say, I have this for you.
Yeah.
Do you want it?
And Jesus doesn't say that. But he's leading him that way, like you said. And he's putting this out here and saying, here is the God life, the God-filled life, the Jesus-empowering, Holy Spirit coming upon kind of life that we all ought to want. The question is, do you want it? I would suggest that some people don't quite answer yes. In fact, worse than this guy, some people say, nah, I'm good with what I got.
Or I'm happy here.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet, I think it's an important question for us, because he comes and says, maybe we could put it this way. Do you want what I have for you? And Jesus isn't saying that here, although he comes close to saying that, because he gives it to him eventually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But he says, do you want to get well? And the guy, but that's true of us, right? When God asks us or shows us or kind of demonstrates, we don't get how much he wants to do in our lives, right? We don't get it. I don't care. We're like, oh, I hear people say, you should never be surprised. You ought to have faith and don't be so surprised at God's miracles. Oh, come on.
Like, how can you not?
Come on.
Like, we would have to think like God in order to not be surprised.
Right.
Which,
And he wants to do, as Paul says, so much more than we can ask or imagine.
Yeah.
Which I think is true. So do you want him to do that? Mm-hmm. And he comes and says, do you want more? Do you want this? Do you want healing? Do you want the full life? Aren't those the questions that Jesus is asking us? Do you want this? In this case, it's healing.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important issue to talk about, but the other issues as well. Do you want this? And you got to answer that, because I think we get caught up in other things and we believe other ways to get there, like this guy. But the pool.
Yeah. And if I only save enough money, if I work more hours, if
find the right relationship, or get the right job, or buy the right toy, or whatever the case is.
Which, makes me think, again, back to the well.
Yeah.
Right? And here, well, I can't get to the pool. You don't need to.
Right.
I'm here.
That's a very interesting point. Because maybe in both or all three, I have to think about Nicodemus, that the woman is thinking about that well. Like this guy's thinking about that water,
Or Nicodemus is thinking
the womb,
actual birth, right?
Right. Going in again. What? But particularly the last two stories, but maybe Nicodemus too. But that they look back to the wrong thing.
Well, and that's where, I think they're all examples of God is so much bigger than we know.
Right. So do we look to the right thing? Do we look to Jesus? Do you get Christ-centered? Do you know to get Christ-centered? Do you know that he's the power of life? Do we incorporate his life in ours and say, Christ, live in me. Holy Spirit, come down upon me. God, I'm going to focus on you. I'll go to work. I'll do whatever, but I'm going to be focused on you. Because I want whatever it is you're trying to give me. And in this case, Jesus comes looking for the worst person. Well, I could fit that category.
Can't we all?
Right. And if we understood it, we would say, I am the least of sinners, like Paul said, I'm the. But
And accepting that.
Christ came looking for me.
Yeah.
Like he came looking for that guy. And he says, do you want to get well? Well, I want to answer yes. And I want what Jesus has. I want I'm going to, and turn my focus away from the other methods of getting whatever I'm trying to get and turn to him and let him heal me. Yeah. He is compassionate to do it when I'm a little lost. But he wants me to look to him and trust him and realize he is the real source of life.
That's good.
Yeah. Say yes. Yes, I want what you have, Jesus. Great.
Great discussion.
Yeah, interesting passage.
Well, thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you on the next one.